today of all of the folks that are trying to bring choice to more businesses and residents in some cases, not Missouri, but in other cases, to the constituents. And that's what we do for a living, is we try to bring choice right to retail energy consumers. So as I get started here, I wanted to make some introductions, but before I do, I would like Joe, our head of marketing, to just share a little bit of our webinar housekeeping engagement items.
All righty. Good morning, everybody, and good morning to our LinkedIn Live viewers. Some webinar housekeeping. We definitely want your engagement. We have enabled the Q&A functionality for this event. We've also enabled the upvote functionality and allowed you to comment on other people's questions as well. Please note that these will be visible to all attendees and panelists, so have some couth. And we want you to chat with our host panelists as well. So you can send us direct questions, or you can just drop the questions in the Q&A section or in the chat functionality. If you have any questions at all or need any support, you can direct email me here at the bottom. That's joseph.monroy@nrx.com. If you have any issues with audio or video whatsoever, I'd be happy to help. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Joe. None of this is possible without your expertise and ability to bring this all together. So thank you so much for all you do, not only for NRX, but for these webinars and bringing this information to the industry. I'd also like to share with everybody, because we get this question quite often throughout Q&A, that yes, the webinar recording will be available. It'll be automatically sent out to anybody who was registered. Probably will not be this time until around next Wednesday. On this case, Joe's thankfully taking a little bit of time off, which is a good thing. And we will get that webinar recording out to everybody in the middle of next week. So yes, recording will be available, and yes, you can share with others. There will be a YouTube posting as well, but please engage with us through Q&A. Let us know. I love moderating. So with that, I won't take too much more of your time, but just telling you a little bit of what you're going to get out of today's session. First is, again, bringing retail energy choice to more constituents. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about Missouri and the work Jake and MOERA is doing. But then we'll also have representation from Retail Energy Advancement League, Chris Ercoli, as well as Richard Spilkey from RESA. And you might not even know what those acronyms mean, so we'll tell you here in a second. You'll also understand a little bit more about what this legislation is, and does it have a real chance of succeeding and passing in 2023 or not? And then how can each of you as individual brokers, suppliers, or even just market participants support these efforts, okay? Why is NRX doing this? NRX is a data platform and connectivity platform for retail energy. We do sales and sales operations and really focus on commissions for brokers and suppliers and how brokers and suppliers communicate in the market of retail energy. It is not possible to bring really solid offerings to the end use customer unless we're trying to make it as efficient as possible. And that's why NRX started about 7 years ago, as well as why we're still here today, focused on those solutions. Connecting people through technology to increase trust in retail energy markets. That's what we do. So that's why we're here today and bringing together this great group of panelists. Without further ado, I don't need to introduce myself, so I'm going to go and introduce Jake. Jake Silverman is the president and lobbyist of MOERA, working with the legislator. Hey, Jake, you want to do a little introduction to yourself?
Well, thank you very much. Jake Silverman, Olympus Political Consulting. I'm the lobbyist for the Missouri Electric Restructure Association. We've been working on this for now about this. I think we're going into our third year. And so it's been a pleasure working with NRX. We appreciate them having us on, and we appreciate people tuning in and hearing our story. So thank you very much.
Awesome. And then Representative Don Mayhew, who is a state representative for Missouri, couldn't make it, but did send one of his lead staffers here. Mark, kind of maybe look not that similar. I'm not you don't have the cool mustache, man. So I'm gonna say, but no, please introduce yourself and just Don's, what you do for Don and anything you can.
My name is Mark Kozart, and like you said, I work with Representative Don Mayhew. I'm a legislative director, and I work closely with Jake. I work closely with Representative and on some of these issues very closely, and excited to be here.
Awesome, man. I'll have one good pointed question for you later, I promise. Richard, man, you probably don't need much introduction in this industry either. You've been around just like me forever, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you do for RESA and what you want to say to the audience today.
Well, yeah, speaking of that, Jason, that back in the day, Thomas Edison used to say, since I have been around as long as you think I have, actually, I don't know what he used to say, but I've read about him. But anyway, yeah, so I'm representing RESA, as you mentioned, the Retail Energy Supplier Association. I work at Constellation, but I hold the position at RESA of working with, we call it the Emerging Markets Committee. And so there's 3 states right now that are actually considering and looking at expanding the ability for customers to choose their retail electric supplier. Missouri obviously is one of them, and that's what we're focused on here today. So I represent the organization of retail suppliers that are engaged in that effort.
Awesome. Really appreciate that, Rich, and thanks so much for joining. And then Chris, a little new to the scene. Real is a little new to the scene, but a great retail supporter. Tell us a little bit about Real and your role there.
Hey, thank you guys. So Chris Erickley, President, CEO of the Retail Energy Advancement League. Real is focused on the expansion and modernization of retail markets. We predominantly focus on the customer experience, and if we improve the customer experience and we improve customers' ability to be educated on what retail markets are, we believe that we'll see drastic expansion and enhancement in all markets. So I support what Jake is doing here. I support what Richard's doing here, and just really excited to get plugged in.
Love it. Thanks so much, Chris. Love having, again, the more the merrier when it comes to trying to bring choice to retail energy constituents. It takes a village. Richard and I both started our careers under the late, great Dr. Phil O'Connor, who was in charge of bringing choice to Illinois on many things, including energy. But he really taught me what choice markets, why choice markets, and why that is beneficial to the customer. I know he taught Richard a lot as well. So, just mentioning that it does take a village, and the more the merrier. Chris, really excited to have you. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Jake. Jake, tell us a little bit about where you guys have been with this legislation, right? And then we'll get into where we're going. Perfect.
Well, again, thank you very much. So we started this effort in 2020 after the 2020 session. A guy named Mike Grimes, who is the president of Commercial Energy Consultants, a broker in Missouri. Obviously, he lives in Missouri and he does work in Illinois because we are not a competitive state here. We are a monopoly state. Mike came to me saying he wanted to see about opening the state of Missouri. So our first year, which was 2021, with some legislation, we kind of started going around and talking about what we were trying to do. Now, the legislation that we had was not truly a choice. It had more to do with renting power lines and things like that. But really, the main goal was to bring choice to commercial and industrial consumers. And so when we started this process, we found a couple legislators to sponsor, one in the House and one in the Senate. But we really knew it was more about getting the word out. So we started doing that in 2021. And fortunately enough, we were introduced to Richard and the rest of RESA, along with TIPA. And after talking with them, they convinced us to start our own association, the Missouri Electric Restructure Association, which is what we have now. So that was 2021. Our legislation didn't really go anywhere, but like I said, it wasn't really true. It wasn't a true restructured bill, so it really didn't bring anything of choice to the market. And in 2021, later that year, RESA was nice enough and kind enough to provide some attorneys that wrote and drafted some actual legislation that truly brought a restructure or a competitive market. From there, we were able to attend some TIPA conferences in Chicago. I think that year we also went to Austin for the national one. We connected with NRX and Jason and Joe. And we've just really we were really building our connections to help bring more people on to the Missouri Electric Restructure Association team. You can click the next slide. So now with this new drafted legislation in 2022, we kind of got to work. We found a new sponsor that really, took this issue by the horns, and that was Representative Don Mayhew. I can't thank him enough for the energy that he has put behind this. In 2022, we were fortunate enough to have a hearing in the Emerging Issues Committee. It was a great hearing. Obviously we had the incumbent utilities, argue against it. But the one thing that I take a positive out of is we got to hear their argument against it. And they gave us some, I guess you could say they gave us some fuel for what we want to do next year. We added another member to our Missouri Electric Restructure Association team, our MOERA team. His name is Shane Porter. He is also a broker that lives in O'Fallon, Missouri, which is just outside of St. Louis County. And we've also had some conversations with other industries, such as the solar industry and an association called Renew Missouri, which they seem to be very focused on what we're trying to do and very helpful as well. So like I said, we've had some successes in 2022, and now we're moving on to the next legislative session, and we hope we can kind of grow on our success.
Jake, what were some of those things that they really kind of came out against? What are some of the cons to choice? I mean, everybody on this call is part of the pro side, so we really don't feel like there are cons. I'd love to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of the biggest arguments that they kept bringing up was Texas, the freeze overs in Texas, and that was one thing. And I'll kind of list what they brought up, and then I'll kind of explain where we probably failed in our committee hearing. So they brought Texas up. They brought up something related to a public service council that kind of handles legal matters for people that do have issues with their electric in the monopoly areas.
So like a public utility commission type of.
Well, it's kind of a branch of the Public Service Commission. It's a legal counsel that handles the actual litigation side of things, I believe. And then there was, they brought up the pricing. Oh, well, the pricing in Missouri is less than the pricing in other states that are competitive. Well, we actually had very good responses to those things. Unfortunately, we really didn't get a chance because it was so late in session. There were some other things going on later that day to kind of answer those. So, RESA sent out Dan Algaretti to handle the hearing. And I talked to Dan afterwards, and I said, I think next time what we would do is most likely say, listen, the opponents to this bill are going to say this, and this is why they are wrong, instead of kind of being on the back foot. So like I said, I take it as a positive. We learned what we need to do for the next hearing, which, if you look at Missouri's prices, yeah, they are going to be lower than Illinois, or they probably are lower than Illinois, but the cost of living in Missouri is a lot less than Illinois. So that's something Richard has brought up many a times, and it's something that we will make sure to bring up before our opponents get to the microphone on when it comes to the hearing next year.
Really good. Rich, any in your experience, just anything that you wanted to share on that? The Texas freeze, I think, is interesting when people bring that up, because if you really know about the Texas freeze, it had nothing really to do with choice and a restructured market. It had to do with, generators not being weatherized. And it wasn't just solar, and it wasn't just gas, it was everybody, because that was a once in a lifetime, hopefully, type of storm and event. But outside of that, in terms of the legal and legislative side, what are some of the points that you would bring up next time around?
Well, Jason, you're absolutely right. That is getting to be an old argument, and you're absolutely right. Again, on the storm Uri that occurred in Texas in February of 21 was terrible. But the fact that people in Texas have retail choice had nothing to do with it. You know, the gas lines freeze whether the customers have choice of supplier or not. And so, you know, yes, and we've written about this extensively in the industry. I myself have written white papers on this, but I know a lot of other industry experts have as well, you know, detailing exactly what did what and what retail choice, the impact that retail choice had. Nobody in a position of, you know, decision making in Texas has said that retail competition made the storm effects worse, or, you know, nobody said anything like that. So
Right.
the people in the know don't acknowledge, the storm. So what I really want to say, though, is in response to your question, though, Jason, in addition to the Winter Storm Uri counter arguments, we've heard all these arguments before, Jason. These are not new arguments. You know, the pricing in Rhode Island is high and Rhode Island has choice, therefore we shouldn't do choice. What happens to low income people? What happens, you know, is there cost shifting between large industrial customers and residential customers? We've heard all these. In fact, I've written a white paper myself from RESA's perspective, answering what I've heard over and over again. I call it myths and facts, and it's publicly available on the RESA website, and I'm not going to get into it now, and I'm not trying to, you know, promote our stuff here, but I'm just telling you, we've heard these arguments over and over again, not just in Missouri, but in many of the states that are looking at competitive choice. And frankly, I think it's the utilities, the monopoly utilities, who really ought to be the ones justifying their model, because the competitive states are blowing the monopoly states out of the water when it comes to renewables, when it comes to price performance. Yeah, we'll get to this slide coming up here. Whatever.
You start talking through this. This is great. It's a good transition. I'd love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, okay, yeah, we can skip ahead to this, and we'll just jump on it right now. So
Mhm.
this slide says a lot. This is my only slide in the whole deck here, I think, so I might as well cover it while I have the floor. So if you look at this slide says a lot. Let me explain what I think this slide is telling us. So if you look at the competitive states, there's 14 states that have retail choice, and we group them all together on the left. And you can see the price performance from 2008 to 2020. You know, generally they've gone down. Residential prices have gone up. You can see there 4.7%, but most of the customer classes have gone down. I mean, and this is nominal prices. This is not inflation adjusted. This is, you know, actual prices have dropped in the competitive states. The price performance has been phenomenal. In the monopoly states, meanwhile, there's 35 monopoly states you can see in the middle that we grouped together, including Missouri. Missouri's in that group. And you can see across the board that they've gone up for all customer classes, residential, commercial, industrial, et cetera. And if you look at Missouri specifically, which we've broken out Missouri separately here on the right, you can see Missouri's done terrible. So any pro-monopoly person in Missouri, would have a lot to answer for, in my opinion. You know, what benefits have the monopoly model provided the customers in Missouri over the past 12 years? Clearly, they're doing even worse than the monopoly states.
Right, than the average monopoly state. And I do believe that they do have a lot to answer for. And then the question becomes for me a little bit, why is that why, you know, what does the utility say that they offer? I sometimes think that they lean sometimes, Richard, you and I have had this discussion, is that utilities lean on the fact that we sponsor the local this and we sponsor the local that, and right. And that is something that they use as, some of their fire, right, of why monopoly. And then the question becomes, does everyone realize that bringing choice to retail energy, meaning like C&I clients or residents, all that does is promote choice. It has more participants doing the supply side, not the distribution side, not the poles and wires, not the delivery system. The delivery system, why would it ever make sense to build two sets of infrastructure? No one in choice has ever said, let's build competing distribution lines. They've said for the buying and selling of energy, it's not something that the utilities necessarily are really good at anyway. So is that a topic that they usually use quite often? I know in Ohio, my experience, they use that often.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, we need to get into what is restructuring and what is choice and what is competition. And indeed, the wires, the transmission wires, the distribution wires do remain a regulated monopoly structure. So the competitive states, the 14 competitive states that I've alluded to, they still have utilities there. It's just that the utilities are wires only. They don't own the generators any longer. They are out of the generation business for the most part, and they, make their rate of return on their wires investments and on their delivery of the power. And they still do contribute to the local theater and the local park district and the local the type of contributions they make, to civic things. They still do. But it's just hard oftentimes for someone who's been in a monopoly state their whole career to understand, the difference between a utility in a competitive state and a utility in a monopoly state when they've only seen one type of utility in their working years. But one thing I do want to address back here to the slide, to the bar charts, is this residential thing. So yes, indeed, in the competitive states, the residential prices have gone up 4.7%, red for residential, in the competitive states. That's true. But in the monopoly states, they've gone up 25%. So while it's clear that the residential customers are not benefiting as much as the business customers are, the non-residential, the business customers are knocking it out of the park. But the residential customers too are benefiting by more than 20% in this time period. So everybody's benefiting. And so when a monopoly guy says, hey, the residential customers get harmed and the business customers, when they say that, they're talking about from a monopoly point of view. In a monopoly model, you have a revenue requirement. So you have to collect so much revenue to get your guaranteed rate of return in a monopoly model. So if you lower the industrial customer's price by $1, you have to raise the residential customer's price by $1 to make up for it. So when they say that kind of thing, they're looking at it from a monopoly revenue requirement point of view. But in a competitive market, you don't have a monopoly, you have competition. And so everybody wins. Everybody, you could see the evidence is shown right here on this slide that everybody's winning in a competitive model, but not everybody's winning equally.
Yeah, especially versus those monopoly states. Absolutely.
So anyway, we've heard all these arguments before. We've written extensively to answer the what I call the myths and facts. Maybe they'll come up with a new argument that we'll have to address. And we're happy to do the research, and we do the research. But frankly, I think it's time for people to stand up and say, enough is enough. And the monopolies have, not justified their ability to manage risk, to help customers achieve what they want to achieve. And I think the time has come to give customers choice, not just in Missouri, across the board, but here we're talking about Missouri today.
That's awesome, Richard. I really appreciate that. We've had some great questions coming in on some of this information. And Chris, just kind of bouncing this one over to you, because I know Richard could answer, but you have so much experience in this retail energy restructuring as well. And so what are the costs associated with restructuring? To my knowledge, you have the bill, you have a lobbyist, you have people that are working with legislatures, but in terms of actual restructuring itself, what are the costs associated? How would you answer that question?
Oh man, that's a loaded one.
Mhm.
So first of all, I do want to go back to something that Richard talked about, which I think is really important. Cost is but just one component that retail supply offers to a marketplace. We often find that customers are shopping not just on cost, but on other value-added services that suppliers are offering into the marketplace. And that is a really, really important thing to remember. When we look at restructured markets, oftentimes, if you go to a rate board in Massachusetts or Connecticut or Pennsylvania, for example, a lot of the products and services that are offered there are I'd say the majority of products that are offered on some of these rate boards are 100% clean or 100% renewable. Why? Because that's what customers are asking for. And so, suppliers are putting products and services out into the marketplace based on what consumers are actually asking for. And that's a really, really important piece to remember. So I didn't want to let that one slip by. I thought that's really important to point out. When we talk about the cost of implementation, you can't just flip a switch, right? So it's really, really important for you to have an established and good relationship with the state's regulator, because they are the ones that are actually going to be implementing retail choice. So I would expect a working group and a proceeding and rulemaking. It's a long, lengthy process, and certainly is going to require support from the state regulator, but also from the supplier community, getting involved, participating in proceedings, and using best practices and making sure best practices are actually put in place. A lot of the things that I think are really important is around protecting the consumer, making sure that that rules that are put in place and that are implemented fundamentally are items that revolve around consumer protection, making sure that the products and services that are offered into the marketplace are open, transparent, and clear. So those are the things that I think about, but implementation costs specifically is really around rulemaking and implementation. And Richard, I'll throw it back over to you if there's anything that you think I missed.
Well, there's lots to talk about, but I'll defer. Let the webinar continue as it needs to. But we're always happy to answer these questions and support with data if we need to support with data. At the end of the day, the competitive states are blowing the monopoly states away from a price performance point of view, as I've shown here on the slide, renewables perspective, from a generation build perspective, from a generation operational perspective. I mean, from a reliability perspective, we've got all this data, we've got all the information. How do we get the word into the hands of the policymakers and the decision makers? That's the question. That's what this webinar, I believe, is trying to get to. How can, the channel partners that are members of TIPA that are attending this webinar today, how can they reach out to their customers in the competitive states that have facilities in Missouri or in, the monopoly states that are looking at customer choice, which, Missouri is one of the key ones. That's where we need to get those folks engaged. We need to get those customers to say, hey, we're enjoying the benefits of competitive markets in the states that have competitive markets. We want to realize those same benefits in Missouri.
Yeah, Richard, I completely agree with that. And we'll surely follow up towards the end of this webinar of what people can do to get involved. And so thanks so much for that. One other question came from LinkedIn around what are, some of the environmental impacts that restructuring has. Chris just touched on that a little bit, and we're going to follow up with a link. There's a lot of data that RESA has already put together on this. And as we said, competition brings valuable new options to the market participants, right? So the people that are buying say, hey, no, I really want green energy in Missouri. Well, that's what is the retailers, the suppliers are going to then try to put together to get people to buy, right? That's how competition works. But when constituents want something and they say, hey, monopoly, I want this. How many of you want this, right? Like if it's just a couple of people, there's no niche marketing. When you have competition, oh my God, there's a ton of suppliers that are niche marketers. Constellation, who Richard works for, not. They are a big, I do everything. I give green, I give brown, I got everything for you. But there's a lot of niche marketers too that just focus on some, things like that, environmental impact and things like that. So choice does definitely bring those things. Just in the interest of time, I wanted to just share with Jake, from a MOERA perspective, what do you see as kind of some of the things that you're doing going into next year and some of the things that you're just thinking about? I think the biggest thing to tell the audience today is we're not trying to restructure residential in Missouri first, like top right-hand corner, everybody, right? This is business focused. I think that is so important to this legislation being passed, because when the utility comes out and says, oh, this harms residential customers, you know what? Let's show you what we can do for the business customers, then we'll come back to the residential customers, right? Now, my question, I do have a question for Mark as well, but Jake, please tell us anything you want to on this slide.
No, you're 100% right, along with, with what Richard talked about on the chart on the one slide in front. I will say, we do put a pass through to getting to residential, but our main focus is commercial and industrial. There's going to be another slide here in just a little bit that shows that I think there's about 50 million megawatts per hour that are available in the residential and the commercial and industrial together. But just alone in the commercial and industrial, you got 30 million megawatts per hour, which is, it's quite substantial, especially in the areas of St. Louis and Kansas City where most business is done, and they control most of the economic viability of the state. But yeah, so, that's obviously very important, just focusing on the commercial and industrial. This is not a process. It's, you're not going to see a bill like this and this grand get done this year. So you have to kind of piecemeal it together and take your victories where you can, and instead of trying to take the whole, eat the whole cake. So, we're just taking little pieces at a time and seeing where we can go. And that's where we wanted to start first, was commercial and industrial, eventually leading to a pass through for residential.
That's helpful. Very, very helpful, Jake, from that front. As I am curious, Mark, from a view of the legislator, right? Representative Mayhew has agreed to work with the team and get this, bill presented. But what would be important for you to hear from the constituents themselves that would make or break a bill like this getting passed in 2023 in the legislative session?
Well, in Missouri, excuse me, in Missouri, we're fortunate because, I come from Southeast Missouri originally. I was on electric co-op. When I moved to Lynn, I'm on Ameren. But across the street from me is another co-op. So, and their lights are on as much as my lights are on, and yet their bill is cheaper than mine. And their customer service is by far better than mine. That's just me speaking, but I know Don wouldn't care for me to say that. Now, as far as what we need from the office, we need people to, it sounds cliche, but we need people to email and call their representatives and senators and to tell them, like, look, this is what we want. That's very, very powerful. Even if they may feel like they're being ignored, especially if sometimes I know in my position, we get bombarded with emails and we can't respond to all of them, but it is important. And my boss goes, wait a minute, even one constituent, but you start having 3 or 4 or 10 or more constituents that this is an issue near and dear to my heart. In an email, he pays attention to that. And I think all of them do.
That's huge. And Mark, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. It's the voice, right? It's the voice of these actual constituents that build businesses, pay taxes, do these things. That's why the state representatives and the state legislatures are there, right? They're there to support their constituents. And so we got to hear from the constituents. Now the question is how and what, and I'm going to come back to that on a second. But thanks so much for sharing that, Mark. Jake, anything else to share about just kind of what you see as an overview here, or do you want to jump over to this?
Yeah, so I just want to quickly say one thing about two slides back about the stranded costs. The incumbent utilities are sitting there claiming that their world is ending when we try to pass choice. As Chris and Richard have both said, we're not, and Jason, you said too, they're going to handle the distribution still. They will get that still. That's what they're very good at. Not only that, we provide stranded costs. So for the investments that they have made in the past, clearly we're doing them a favor. We're trying to put them back on even footing to where they started. And so for them to sit there and say that we're trying to destroy them or whatever, we're really not. If anything, we're trying to help them. We're trying to make them solely focus on the distribution side. We're allowing them to have stranded costs so they can get back to even footing, and their investors can be made whole again, as Richard likes to say. They're playing us off as we're evil we're trying to do the right thing right now, and that's to lower the electric costs and provide different options, as Chris said, for renewable and things like that. And we're doing that just as much as they are. So I just wanted to put that out
No,
there.
that's a really good one. This idea of stranded costs, what they're really talking about here, to my knowledge, anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but is talking about like that they've built generation plants, right? And that is a 20-year, 30-year recuperation of costs, right? These are billions of dollars to build sometimes coal plants. And so it sounds like in Missouri, there was some securitization, right? Meaning like, hey, you're going to pay us this rate for this because we needed it. And that's why we built it for you, right? You like a 20-year PPA on the solar farm, right? Same type of thought process. I need that backing. And in that case, it's not to say that they will then bid that out into the market. An open choice market is where suppliers, right, are managing positions on behalf of their customers, and generators are managing long positions, right? I have a bunch of energy, I'm long. I'm a retailer, I have a bunch of customers, I'm short. Great, let's make a deal. You're gonna give me X amount of megawatt hours at X price in the future. You're selling futures contracts. That's the way our industry works, right? So it's not to say that they won't be able to go and get pricing from the market and do deals for future contracts any differently than they do today. It's just that they actually have to compete. Now that is what drives down pricing. So with saying you're evil, oh, you're evil because you're telling me I can't make my 10% return every single year guaranteed. No, we're not. If you can't manage your costs right, and if you can't manage your business well as good as somebody else, then no, you don't deserve to make 10% profit. And that's what we're really saying, right? So I don't know if that helps at all, but I usually try to use different words and passion, and I hope it goes to show you what I believe that to be. Richard, correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, at the end of the day, there's so much to talk about here. And Mark, I would like to get with you one-on-one if you have time, and with Representative Mayhew, so I can make sure that you guys are comfortable with this, because you're going to get hammered with this topic of stranded cost and transition period, and what role the utility has, and whether we're bad guys or good guys, like Jason is articulating. So what I really want to explain is, first of all, what is a stranded cost? It's not a new cost. It's not like we're imposing new costs upon the customers. The customers are already paying stranded costs. They're in the rates. They're not identified as such, but they're in there. In other words, just like Jason said, the utilities have built all these power plants under a monopoly guaranteed rate of return model. And if you transition to a competitive model where the generators are competing, the generators are not worth as much in a competitive market as they were in a monopoly market, because they're not getting that guaranteed rate of return anymore. And every state went through this. This is not new. This has been done many times. It's not new. Missouri is not reinventing the wheel here. But for a person who lives in Missouri, maybe it is new, and maybe it is a little bit scary because they've never done this before. But when you go through a transition period, like all the other competitive states have already done, you need, at least I believe you need, to make the investors, the utility investors, whole on the costs they've already incurred under the monopoly model that they thought they were going to have. And so that's what the transition period is for. It's usually 4, 5, 6 years, give or take. And during that period of time, the utility is allowed to collect stranded cost charges. They would have collected them anyway in the rates, but now we're going to separately identify them to make the utilities investors whole on the investments they already made. But then after that period is over with, so all the competitive states, the 14 competitive states that we've talked about, they got this over with a long time ago. They're not collecting stranded cost charges any longer, or there might be a few left, but 99% of them have been collected a long, long time ago. So customers are not burdened with those out-of-market costs anymore in the competitive states. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing such great price performance in the competitive states that I showed you a minute ago on the bar charts, because they're not saddled with stranded cost charges any longer. They got rid of them a number of years ago.
Yeah, very helpful. And that kind of goes actually to another question we had through Zoom about, is anybody going to be voting on this in November, thinking that that's part of the elections? No, this is different. A couple other points to make that I just know about Missouri is that It does not have to be a bill that's going into the voters' hands. This is decided by the legislature in Missouri. So if it passes in the state, in the House, and then it goes to the Senate, it is law. It is not that it has to be reconfirmed or voted on by the public. Correct on that, Jake? Yes. Cool. And then
Absolutely.
as Richard said, yes, there is a time period. So this is not something that brokers are going to be starting to call into Missouri tomorrow. We need to actually take this step to even have a chance at it in the future, right? And whatever that time period is, that'll be decided by working groups. But where we're at right now is, should we be on a path to that, a place where we can have choice, or should we be on a path where we're saying, hey, utility, you keep getting your 10% of, on a return on investment? And I think that's an easy answer. So Jake, just in the interest of time, let's talk a little bit about what Missouri is going through in 2022 and into 2023 sessions.
Yeah, like I said, last year we had last legislative session, which is from January to May. We had our first true restructuring bill. We had some help from the Show Me Institute, which is probably one of our biggest think tanks in Missouri. They support this as well. We had some help from renewables and things like that. So that was really important. I'm starting to hear more legislators. The more I talk about it, more legislators are interested. Especially the ones that are either just outside of a monopoly area, or ones that are just so fed up with the cost of their electric and going up. So we are starting to see more and more people, more and more legislators kind of come forward and say, hey, I'd be interested in hearing more, which is always a good thing, because those are the same people. If they're willing to come to us and ask, they're also probably somebody that would be willing to sponsor something in the future.
Yeah, and the way to get more of those people really to get involved, meaning like the state senators or folks like Representative Mayhew, and talking and saying, hey, Jake, I know you're working on this. Can you give me some more information? They don't do that unless we, as a retail energy community, tell the people that they actually represent, meaning the businesses in Missouri, to actually do something, right?
Yep.
That's how you're going to get more of that. So I'm glad that you're starting to hear some more buzz, but there's stuff that the people that are listening to this webinar can actually get out and do specifically to make this happen. And I think
and another really big thing is Representative Mayhew. He's been fantastic in this process. He really wants to see this moving forward. When we got done with our hearing in the Emerging Issues Committee last year, he instantly went to what is most likely going to be the Utilities Chairman in the House next year and said, listen, hey, this is the bill that we have. We want a hearing, we want it fairly early to where we can start making some moves on it later in session. And so, we have a representative in Mayhew that is that truly cares about this and is willing to stand up for us. We just need to find a Senate sponsor, which is one of the negatives. I do have a conversation with a certain senator in November that he's actually supported a Senate joint resolution that happened, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, that would have implemented something like this. Now, a joint resolution would have to go to the vote of the people, but he did vote for a SJR years ago. So it is something that could be, we could see in both chambers, and we're hoping to see in both chambers. We just need the help of the community, the brokers, suppliers, consumers. If you have a pizza shop, as Richard likes to say, if you have a pizza shop in Illinois, and you have one in St. Louis, and you're reaping the benefits of what you have in Illinois, let's see what we can do on the Missouri side as well.
Yeah. So, thanks so much for this audience being, so loyal, right? And all the different topics that NRX brings to the table. But this one is something that I'm really passionate about, bringing choice to more folks. So this all stems back to the first mentor I had in my career was the same as Richard's. It was Dr. Phil O'Connor. My first job in 2006 in this industry was literally picking up at a train station, because that's how Dr. Phil O'Connor traveled, picking him up from a train station, bringing him to the local events. And as this was after restructuring had already been passed, this was the year where we were telling all the the consumers of energy about choice. And so we did a road show, and there was setting up a table and representing Constellation, and right, it was awesome. It was such a what a cool experience as a 20-something and 22-year-old learning about retail choice from somebody like Dr. Phil. And he told me that there's only two things. I said, hey, how do we get this into more states? And he said, there's two things that you need. You need money and you need representation. You need money and you need people to actually care about what it is that you're trying to bring to the market, right? And that's it. And so from a money perspective, I turn a little bit towards, the community that will benefit from retail choice, right? The brokers, the suppliers, the people that will benefit from competition, where it's not just the monopoly making money anymore, but businesses that also have a chance to make money at providing the services they do, right? And I turn to that group and say, Nevada had a legislative session about 3 years ago where it passed once, and then when they did the second reform, it failed. And this is in Nevada, you actually it has to be voted on by, the residents, people voting, like the question came from the audience of, what's going on in November. And, I was surprised because the first time it passed 60-40, Richard, right? Something like that, 60-40 it passed. And then the second time it was flipped. It was 35-65.
Yeah, it was actually 70 or more percent, as I recall.
The first time around, right? And then
Yes.
The question goes, wait a minute. Did the residents all of a sudden just say, oh, no, choice is bad? No, what happened is that the utilities spent $70 million on advertisement of trying to say, hey, vote against this. And from the standpoint of positive and trying to promote choice, $28 million was spent on the pro side. That can swing very drastically individuals' emotions that don't know all this information that we do. So my call to action here is that this is a very different state. It doesn't have those same challenges that Nevada had. This can get done. Jake and I have been talking about this for 2 years. He's close in doing what he's doing in Missouri. He has the support. A little bit of extra money, $1,000 a month would help, right? Anything would help. So the point is if you want to be in the know as a broker or as a supplier and want to really make sure that you know everything that's happening in Missouri as we get closer and closer to a choice state, then I would ask, definitely consider this. And if you can't do this, there is an ask that's free coming up next. But before I do, Jake.
Yeah, I just want to dovetail off that really quickly. We're not asking, $28 million on the pro side of things in Nevada. I run political campaigns as well. Political campaigns are always, unless it's for a state rep, for something as grand as this will, a campaign will always cost way more money than it would to lobby this in the legislature. As you see, you could do this probably in the legislature, $200,000, $300,000. It's probably a very valid attempt. And, obviously it's not going to happen right away, but it's something that moves forward over time. But, if just alone for the advertisements that you're going to have to do, if you're going to do this on a ballot initiative, it's going to cost upwards of $20 million. It's going to be costly. So, this is a way to do this with, less risk, I think, and probably a higher likelihood. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there.
Dude, that's so helpful. Jake, one thing I know about you is this money is not going to, buy Jake a Ferrari or a Tesla.
I wish.
I say Ferrari, but now I'm going to start saying Tesla because, that's where we're going as a society. But I know you wish, but maybe one day, again, it'd be so cool to see you pass this. And so I appreciate, everything you're doing. And so if it's not that you want to benefit from MOERA and from the information that Jake has and keeping you in tune and running these, Friday calls, then any money would help, right? A one-time contribution, a one-time anything. We've tried to make this as turnkey as possible by working with MOERA. NRX has no involvement in this besides giving a platform here and putting our voice behind it. But We say, hey, you want to do a one-time $1,000 contribution because that's all you got? Fine, right? There's a GoFundMe page set up for this initiative, and we welcome you to use your phone, scan, donate whatever you can. Now, if you're not able to donate money or don't feel that there is a benefit to you as an individual from donating money, then there is something every single person on this call can do. And I am asking everyone to take this action right now. If you are a broker, if you are a supplier, pick up your phone right now, okay? Scan the code to your right and see how easy this is. We have literally, Richard talked earlier about like what you need to do is, or sorry, I apologize. Mark talked about earlier, what's important to a state legislator. It's to hear from their constituents. Well, we made this so easy for you and so easy for your customers to do. You can click on this link, scan it, and then it'll bring up the web page. And it is a turnkey email where the system will automatically find, based on the person's address, their state representative or their state senator, and it will be able to then send that templated email off to the state legislator. Now, what we're asking you to do specifically is every single person on this call that's a broker has customers in choice states. That's what you do for a living. That's how you build your business. I am incredibly confident that some of those customers have also facilities in Missouri. What we're asking you to do is contact your buyer in the choice markets, ask them who would be the buyer in Missouri if there was choice, although there's not, and can they take this action? Can you get them to send an email to their representative? I am asking everybody to define 2 customers, just 2. Grab 2 of your customers that have locations in Missouri and take this action to help support this bill. I think it's an easy ask. We will follow up on that ask. Jake, Chris, Richard, am I off in this ask? Do we think we're making it as turnkey and easy for everybody as we possibly can? It's 2 clicks of a button.
No, it's perfect. If you have family, friends, relatives, call your mom, whoever, get them to scan and call and reach out to their elected officials. That's the
You know
most
what I
important
didn't
thing.
say? You know what? Hey, if anybody watched Monday Night Football, man, just call them up and be like, hey, did you see that Chiefs win, man? That was amazing. Now go click on this.
That'll
link
go
right
far.
now.
That'll go far. That will go far.
Give a little bit before you ask for a little bit, right? Give
Yeah,
them a little.
absolutely.
Yeah, did you see that game? It was a fun game. I'm a football fan, so it was a great game overall, but very glad. It's a good talking point. Richard, anything to add? Thanks so much.
Well, this is the most important thing. It can't be overstated, and I'm really glad you emphasized with Jason and supported it, Chris. This is the most important thing. Chris and I might have experience in this type of thing. We might have cool charts and cool graphs to explain how competitive markets work and answer people's questions, and that's all well and good. At the end of the day, the customers have to speak up for themselves and ask for what they want. That's what is needed. That's number one. I presume Mark would support that statement. And so, yeah, so Jason's ask of contacting 2 customers, I want to emphasize that as a real helpful item if you can take that back.
Yeah, I just thought of something again. Everybody on the phone. Oh, Mark, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what everybody's saying of how important that is. And honestly, if each rep and each senator, even if they only got 2 people, had 2 people, that's powerful stuff, especially if it's constituents. And if you have any kind of business dealings, but they're not your rep, but you got business dealings or you have contacts or you have roots, make sure that you state those things and why it's important to you. Also, a lot of you guys have expertise. You guys probably don't realize this because you're insiders, but this is actually pretty complicated stuff as far as if you don't know anything about, electric and any of this stuff. I mean, I had to learn this myself on the fly, and it wasn't easy. Jake sat down with me. He had some contacts for me to talk to. Luckily, my boss, Representative Mayhew, is a engineer and surveyor, so it doesn't take him long to catch on to these kind of things. But you guys have information, and just say, hey, this may be complicated to you, but I can help you. And information is powerful stuff.
I love it, Mark. That's so huge. And again, we know we can take this action. And then we also, what Mark is saying is we should be, as industry leaders and people who have this information and know this, we should be able to reach out to these state representatives and state senators and just say, hey, I can be a resource for you. as you get asked by your constituents, come ask me, right? Don't feel like you have to learn it on your own. I just wanted to say real quick, a lot of the people on the call, again, brokerage firms, we're sales and marketing professionals. That's what I do for a living too, is sell and market. My job's hard because I sell to salespeople. Try that on for size, right? Master negotiators, it's amazing. But we still get deals done. And, I think about this in a way of like, as a sales professional, when you're trying to sell something and get somebody to take some type of action, you're constantly thinking about what's in it for me, right? That's what another person thinks is, oh, what's in it for me? And so, when we think about asking our constituents, right, to go do something, we have to say it in a way of what's in it for them. And what's in it for them is lower prices. Competition brings lower prices. Richard showed this. And so as you talk to these people, it is really trying to put it in a way of what is in it for them, right? And I do believe that they will easily take action and they'll thank you for it. And then you'll have another facility to serve, right? As a retail energy broker. So, all right, thanks so much for those comments. Sorry, hey, Joe put a slide in the last minute. Should have flipped to this. Thank you, Joe. This is how easy it is. It's literally name, email address, where you are, and that's it. And you click send and boom, you have emailed a very nice templated, hey, we support choice. We really want you to learn about this. Talk to MOERA about it. Very, very easy. So I think we've answered most of the questions. I'm going to try my best to actually wrap up on time for once in my life. If you've ever been on a webinar of mine, you already know to book it 15 minutes after or watch the replay, but we're going to end on time. So if there's any other questions, please share them. If not, I just wanted to thank very quickly our panelists today, Chris and Rich, everything you guys do with REAL and RESA. I mean, we wouldn't be here as an industry without it. So thank you, so much for all your efforts there. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, more than my pleasure, and more to come on this topic. I look forward to getting in the battlefield together. Hey, if you ever need a guy to represent and maybe do a little dog and pony, I know a guy who loves to talk. Me. Jake, everything you're doing with MOERA, again, known you now for 2.5 years. You're building your own political consulting organization as well through Olympus. You've been nothing but, a gem for retail energy through these conversations. I've enjoyed our meetings at TIPA and others, and just wanted to thank you as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate Jason and everything that NRX does.
Thank you so much, man. Just trying to make this industry a little bit more efficient, and then, hey, we can serve our end use customers, and maybe more of the legislators would be like, oh, now we can bring more choice to more states because the industry is operating more efficient. We'll see, right?
Absolutely.
To be determined, but it takes a village. And Mark, thanks so much for representing Representative Mayhew, Don Mayhew, today. It was really awesome to have a perspective of somebody who actually can do something about passing this bill.
My pleasure, and thanks for inviting us.
That's awesome. And then just real quick, just following up, hey, NRX is having actually a double feature webinar this month. Not only are we bringing this awesome Missouri restructuring / choice webinar to you, we also have been chosen. I believe he's actually on the call. He was in the beginning, Mr. John Negis from DNV. DNV is a very large consulting company for energy and not just retail, but beyond. They're an amazing organization that has been around for a very long time within retail energy. I even remember as a youngin, I know I'm still young, but a youngin in retail energy, I was always like, ooh, I'll really have made it when I go to one of the DNV conferences. And then they stopped doing the conferences and it was very disappointing. But nonetheless, a very powerful organization. They have done a survey on brokers and how brokers feel about suppliers and how suppliers feel about brokers. And a lot of information is going to be shared. If you want to know what's going on across the world of choice competitive energy markets, I would strongly suggest you join this. It will be John and I and Joe talking about all of the results from this survey and doing the national unveiling of those results. So I encourage you to join us for that next talk. It'll be in 2 weeks from today. And with that, I conclude this webinar and just thank everyone. Thanks to the audience. Thank you to the panelists. Really appreciate everyone's time today. Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care, guys. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining
Bye,
us.
thanks.